What's going on YouTube? I thought I would do a quick video in light of the new IDPA 2017 rule book. There's probably some folks who are at the deeper end of the sharpshooter pool, maybe experts, masters who are thinking about going to USPSA. Ultimately, when they announced the 1 second to point, 1 second per point down rule about a year ago is when I started seriously entertaining the idea of shooting USPSA. So ever since trying it, I've made the switch, and I don't think there's any turning back for me at this point. But if you're considering checking it out, I figured I'd impart with you some knowledge. I'm by no means an expert. I'm about a middle B shooter, maybe. I don't know. I haven't shot enough classifiers to really say where I've plateaued because it keeps going up. But right now I'm in B class, which first thing you have to get used to with USPSA is that it's exceptionally humbling with how the classification is done. It's graded on a bell curve, so every single classifier, course of fire, which is going to be one of the stages in any of your monthly club matches, is going to be graded against the best person who's ever shot it. So they're going to take whatever their score was, and that's going to be 100%. That's the best you can possibly do. And then whatever your score is going to be a percentage of whatever it is they shot. Shooting classifiers in USPSA is kind of a mini skill set. It's very much like the IDPA classifier, but there's more of a premium placed on speed. That's not to say accuracy is not important. It is very important, especially for shooting 9mm. But you can outrun some less than perfect hits. It's really tough to outrun mics or D hits. That's not good. But you can make up for some C's with enough speed to a limited extent in the middle of the pack. At the top end, everyone's shooting for alphas. So just real quick, the way that USPSA is scored is different from IDPA. IDPA uses a time plus model. So all of your accuracy on target is assigned time values, time penalties that are added to your time, and lowest total time wins. USPSA is different. Every stage is basically like a mini pistol match, and and so you shoot that, and all of your points on the targets are added up in total, and then you divide that by your total time. There are two types of targets in USPSA, the classic and the metric, or the turtle target and the humanoid target. And there's an A zone, B zone, C zone, and D zone, and they're worth different amount of points whether you're shooting minor or major. If you're shooting minor, you really need to be focusing on getting your alphas. So take the time to get your hits in that regard. So you know, let's say it's a 10-round course of fire, the maximum match point value for that stage would be 50 points. So everyone's going to shoot the same stage, then everyone's total hits is going to be totaled up. You're going to lose points for penalties, a mic and a no-shoot and a failure to engage. All those are minus 10 points. They're weighted the same. So a penalty on a mic or a no-shoot basically erases 2 alphas, which is pretty painful on especially short courses of fire. So everyone shoots the same course of fire. Your points are added up, divided by your time. That becomes your hit factor. So if I shot this 10-round course of fire in 10 seconds, I've got a total, I shot all alphas, and I've got a total of 50 points. 50 divided by 10 is 5. I have a hit factor of 5. And so let's say I shot it the best, then everybody's going to be rated against my 5. So if you shot like a 4.3, you can do the math and figure out what 4.3 divided by 5 is, and that's your percentage of my time. I shot 100%. You would shoot whatever your percentage is. Let's say it was a 4, and that's 80%. So of the match points available for that stage, I would get 50 match points, and you would get 40 match points because you shot 80%. So that's kind of how that works. It's why it's important it's nice. It kind of cuts both ways. If you bomb a very point heavy stage, it's really going to hurt you overall in the match. If you bomb a low point stage, I mean, it's still going to hurt, but it's not something you can't recover from. and do well on. I mean, everybody's going to bomb a stage given enough time, but you can bounce back. It's not quite like a bad stage in IDPA where if you accidentally tag 2 non-threats because you indexed on the wrong target, or there's bad visibility, or whatever, all of that added time penalty can really come back to bite you. So that's the scoring model. As far as the divisions are concerned, the ones that are really worth discussing are production, limited, single stack, and open. Production is basically the equivalent of SSP and IDPA. There are no modified or external modifications other than sights and removable grips. You can do stippling in some areas or apply grip tape in some areas, but they've got drawings that tell you where you can and where you can't do that. All of it's going to be double action starts, so if you have a double action, single action firearm, you're going to have to decock it fully. Unless it has a decocker, you can use that. The holsters are going to be pretty similar to IDPA, except for you can use a inner-outer belt, a competition belt, which I would recommend eventually picking up one. And you can use a drop offset hanger. In IDPA, the rule is the front strap has to be clear of the top of your belt, and you can only have a dowel's width between the firearm and your body. USPSA is a little bit more liberal as long as everything's behind your hip bones. And the back strap has to be above the back or the top of the belt, and you've got 2 inches from your inner belt to your firearm, so it can be offset a pretty good amount. So there's that. You don't have to do that. You can use your IDPA rig. For about the first 6 months I've shot USPSA, that's exactly what I've done, and I've actually had pretty good success doing it. I am to the point now where I think the mag pouches are holding me back, so I'm getting some of the race mag pouches. Finally got my inner outer belt as well. So that's kind of the equipment. Next division is limited division. You can start to use race holsters in that regard, and you can move your holster pretty much anywhere. If you want to do appendix carry and stuff like that, then you can do that in limited. You can load up the magazines all the way up, and that's good news. And this is the first division where major and minor scoring come into account. You really need to be shooting a 40 Smith & Wesson. That's kind of optimized for capacity and still makes major power factor. 9mm can't make major power factor. So if you want to shoot limited, a single action gun, a heavy single action gun that shoots 40 Smith & Wesson is going to be what takes you there. Everybody runs those skeletonized speed holsters that only cover the trigger guard. You can put the forward speed cant on it and all that stuff. It's really, really fun. The philosophy in which you shoot limited is more aggressive and faster than guys shooting production. You don't reload as much. If you, the big difference between major and minor is that a Charlie is where a Charlie is right next to the Alpha and the targets, and a Charlie is worth 4 points in major versus 3 points in limited. So if you 2 Charlie a target in production, then you have basically left 4 points on the table on that target, which is almost an entire Alpha. Whereas if you did it in limited, you've left 2 points on the table. So in limited, you can absolutely outrun less than perfect hits. In fact, it would behoove you to do so. Don't make up Charlies in limited. Sometimes, if you can do it fast enough in production, it's going to behoove you to pick up the alphas if you can do it quickly. Open is where you start to get, the magazine capacity in limited is basically based around the overall length of the magazine has to be 141 millimeters or less. So generally, 40 Smith & Wesson, that's going to be a 20 to 21 round magazine on a 2011 or the Tanfo or CZ Tactical Sport frames. As many rounds as you can cram in. I don't even know what the 9mm equivalent is, maybe 22, 24 rounds. In open, the magazine capacity goes up even more. You get 171 millimeter mag, and so the guys shooting the 38 supers and the 9mm majors are going to end up with like between 28 and 31 rounds. So it's pretty ridiculous. In open, pretty much anything goes. You can use compensators, optics, all that stuff. That said, your belt really doesn't have to be super expensive. A lot of people think that you're going to sink a bunch of money in USPSA. It's as much as you really care to spend, just like IDPA, honestly. A properly set up, optimized for USPSA belt is generally going to run about $300 all in, but it doesn't have to. You can use whatever instructors or wilderness rigger belt that you've got with whatever you've been using in IDPA. I mean, to a small extent, it is going to matter as you try and get higher up in the classification system. But as far as in the match, will it actually be realized? Probably not as much. The reason it's important on classifiers, because if a drop offset holster is going to gain you a tenth of a second on the draw, which a lot of people report is what it picks you up, a classifier's time is like, between 4 and 10 seconds, depending on which one that it is. So a tenth of a second actually is a pretty big deal for classifiers. However, in a match context, you're really not going to notice, because usually you're doing something when you draw. More often than not, it's going to be like heels touching marks, toes touching marks, hands on marks, hands on table, whatever. So there's that. As far as actually shooting USPSA and how it's different than IDPA, it's completely free form. They're going to specify to you a start position, and if it is a field course, and there's not a stage procedure in place that, mandatory reloads or anything like that, or mandatory target engagements, which are pretty rare, honestly, then you can pretty much do whatever you want. You shoot the targets in the way that makes sense to you, the way that you can remember, the way you think you can get the most points the fastest is really what it boils down to. What I've found in production is it generally behooves you to shoot the targets you have to shoot from each position and try and group targets into 4 and 5 target arrays and don't miss. You really need to learn how to call shots, and you need to learn which targets are high risk, and it's better to take time on. There's a lot of steel that gets used in USPSA. That's a bit of a departure from IDPA. You can have entire stages that are falling steel, which is a lot of fun, but each steel plate that falls is worth 5 points. So, if you can transition onto a target and engage a, metric target with 2 shots for 2 alphas in a second, you've got 10 points in 1 second. That's great. If it's a mini popper, you're going to engage it in about a second as well, but it falls down, and that's only worth 5 points. If you have to do makeup shots on that, you're gaining time. So let's say it took me a second and a half to get those 5 points. You can see that I've basically given up 25% of the hit factor for that one target or whatever. If you do the math of 5 divided by 1 versus 5 divided by 1.5, you can see how it would affect your score. So don't miss steel. Hit steel is a big piece of advice. The biggest difference is you have to learn how to get comfortable being very aggressive. The overall approach, the setups and everything in USPSA are more aggressive than they are in IDPA. If you think about how you approach a shooting position, you're going to end up leaning out gingerly, making sure that your feet are behind cover and only 50% of your upper body is shown. There's none of that in USPSA unless there's fault line. The fault lines cause a hard lean. But one thing that is really cool about USPSA is that it's basically shooters versus the stage designers. Like, the stage designers have to put enough thought and care into their stage designs that gamers can't abuse the stage design to their benefit. An example of that is if you watch my 2016 Georgia State section video, there was a stage with a porthole with a rope, and you had to pull down on the rope to open the porthole. Stage designer clearly intended you to hold the rope with one hand and fire at the targets through the porthole with your strong hand only. Well, I watched Sal Luna, the current IPSC national champion, do it, and what he did is there was a knot on the rope so you could grab it easily. He grabbed it with this knuckle and pulled it down and built a firing grip. And so then you could engage the whole array with both hands. And so I did the same as him and ended up taking 5th on that stage, when I was generally taking them between 26th and 36th on all the stages. So I picked up a bunch of match points because Sal Luna had figured out how to outsmart the match director, and that is a big thing. Another thing that's going to be very foreign to you is you don't have to engage targets everywhere you can see them, unlike in IDPA. If you start in a start position and you've got 2 targets on either side and 4 targets downrange, I would probably just engage these 2 targets on either side and not the 4 down range, because there's a really good chance I have to go down range anyway to engage them, so I don't have to shoot at them from this position unless it makes sense. Sometimes when it makes sense to line up on longer targets, because it takes longer to shoot them, your splits are slower, you spend more time aiming. As if you can eliminate a position you don't have to move to later on. If I can shoot this one target down here and not have to go to this spot down here to finish the stage, and it's going to eliminate a section of movement, then it probably is worth my time to do that. So there's that. But overall, it's just a lot of fun. Round counts on typical club matches in any month is going to range between about 150 and 200 rounds. I'd say bring about 250 in case you have to reshoot a stage or you want to reshoot a bunch of classifiers, which you can apparently pay to reshoot classifiers. I don't do it, but some people do who really care about what their classification is. It doesn't behoove you to get it any higher than what it's going to naturally build up to, because, I mean, other than the stupid little paper card that they don't even send you in the mail anymore. Thanks, Mike Foley. He's the new USPSA president who stopped sending out new membership cards with updated classification. It really doesn't get you anything. There are cash payouts in USPSA matches for placing high. I won C class at the Georgia State section, and I got a check for $170. That was pretty cool. Major matches, there's not bumps in major matches quite like there are in IDPA. If you beat 10 people in your classification, you don't automatically move up to the next one. What happens is if enough grandmasters shoot your division, then they will submit the entire match as a classifier for you. So I was like 72.22% of the production winner. I was like 30th or something at Georgia State, and they uploaded it as a classifier for me. So my classification, you know, it dropped out one of my older lower scores and picked up that 72%. So as a result, I ended up bumping out of C class into B class from shooting that match, but not because I won my division in that. I think in C class there were 30-something shooters, and I believe they ended up being cash payouts for the top 5. It's the same way in B class. There's some math formula. I think they state the prize tables, how they do it. The matches are going to be different, how they do this scoring and stuff like that. A lot of the matches are actually going to like a no pasting scenario. That's the way Georgia State was, where they'll have like 4 volunteers on the bay. 2 will do the scoring and 2 will reset the stages. So that's awesome. It's a lot of fun. I would encourage you to get out there and try it. Do not be embarrassed on what you port over as. The equivalency, if you are a master in IDPA, there's a strong chance you're going to come over as a B class or maybe an A class shooter, depending on how good you are at the stand and deliver kind of stuff. If you are an expert, there's a good chance you're going to be a high C class or low B class, which sounds terrible, but it really is nothing to be ashamed of. Once you kind of figure out what you need to be doing and how you need to be doing, the importance, speed is placed on all of the gun handling and manipulations. You can obviously drop magazines all over the place. You have to shoot from inside fault lines. You don't have to move with inside fault lines. You can run wherever you want to run. Range commands are pretty similar. The commands are make ready, are you ready, stand by, then they let you do your thing. Then at unload and show clear, they'll say if clear, hammer down and holster. So that's pretty much the same thing as IDPA in that regard. I'm trying to think if there's any other tips or anything like that, but I mean, it's a different world. I mean, I was a high expert in IDPA before coming over to USPSA. My gun handling in 6 months has improved probably more than my practice in IDPA in the past year. At the Georgia State section, I actually beat 2 IDPA distinguished masters. One was shooting production with me. I was shooting production. The other was shooting limited, and by all counts, limited guy should beat a production guy just due to the fact that he's probably shooting a 40, shooting major, and doesn't have to reload as much. So it's a lot of fun, but it's a different way, a different style of shooting. I think it does increase your gun handling skills more than IDPA, because you have to be so precise. You have to understand what it is you're doing and the fastest way to do it, and everything becomes about getting as many points as you can per second, and that's how you want to do your stage breakdown. You start kind of thinking outside the box because it's not really linear, and it's not just kind of developing the nuances on where you should dump around to get a emergency reload to, you know, I can engage this one target in these 4 separate places. Which one makes it the best? Which way is going to be the best for me to score the most points per second? And that's going to be an individual call for every single shooter. Guys who can shoot really rapidly at long range might take a little bit more risk, or some guys who can hose really fast might just try and do more running and less aiming, if that makes sense. There's definitely stages where you can opt for more aiming and less running, or more running and less aiming, depending on how you want to do it. And it'll come down to execution for every shooter. You need to shoot USPSA. As a guy, I am a safety officer until my membership expires in February. It is a lot of fun. All of the things you like about IDPA, it's just more in USPSA. The round counts are higher. Stages can be up to 32 or 36 rounds, and in club matches where they really don't care, I mean, they might run it up to 40 or 50 rounds on a stage, and that's not uncommon. It seems like every match has one just total hoser stage that's like, you know, 40 rounds or more. You do need a bunch of magazines. Your first time out, I'd recommend shooting limited and not production, because number one, you probably don't have enough mag pouches or magazines. A limited belt is basically going to be 2 magazines on the belt, 1 in the gun, just like IDPA, but you can top off the magazines. If you've got extended base pads, all that stuff, please use them. You'll be just fine. As long as you're getting like 19 to 21 rounds in your gun, if you've got 60 rounds of ammo on your belt, you should be fine. For limited division, you can shoot production if you, number one, have enough mag pouches, and number 2, have enough magazines. So production, the mag capacity is topped out at 10 rounds, just like it is in IDPA. So generally a production belt will have at least 4, usually 5 mag pouches. So the loadout ends up being 1 magazine in the gun, 5 on the belt. And usually the 5th magazine, you don't really get into it. It's only on those really high round count stages where there are like 5 or 6 shooting positions where you can reload in between them, or you get into it. If you don't have a mag brush, I'd encourage you to get one, just because you'll be dropping a lot of magazines with loaded rounds in them. And if it's a really sandy bay or whatever that you're shooting on, it's good, you know, at the end of the match, beginning of the match, whenever, just to clean out your mags. So just get a mag brush that has a pin on the bottom, so you can remove the base plates pretty easily. You know, after you kind of get a flavor for it, I think that you can shoot production if you want to, or single stack. Single stack would be the same way. Single stack's interesting. If you shoot major in single stack, you only get 8+1 rounds. It doesn't matter if you're shooting a 40 Smith & Wesson that holds the same as a 9mm. You can only load up, if you've declared major power factor, you can only load up 8 rounds. So it becomes an interesting dichotomy on whether or not you should shoot major or minor on matches. If you're considering a single stack for USPSA, get a 40 Smith & Wesson's the way to go. You can shoot minor if you want and load it up to 10+1 and use really lightweight projectiles and keep your per round cost down if you need to, or you can shoot major if you want and then use your 180 200 grain projectiles and let it happen that way. You just won't have as much capacity in the gun, since the stage design rules require, you know, no more than 4 targets be engaged from a single position for 8 rounds, to not totally screw guys in revolver and single stack. You can do it, but most people are shooting single stack minor these days just because they can run similar stage plans to production. If you're shooting open, I really don't know what to tell you. It's kind of like death metal. It's a lot louder, it's a lot faster, and it's not for everybody. But those guys, I mean, it's like watching a track meet, watching a good open guy shoot. It looks like a lot of fun. I just don't happen to have the $4,000. Oh, there's a leaf. I don't have the $4,000 for an open gun build at the moment. But please, if you've got any more questions, you actually made it this far in the video, good on you. I'm happy to discuss anything at all with you. Get in contact with me, leave comments, send me a direct message or whatever. I'm happy to talk to you about it. But if you're at all considering trying a USPSA match and you've been an IDPA shooter, please just go and do it. Almost everybody who's made that jump has come back and said, like, I probably should have started doing this and not the other way around. If you're in an area where it makes more sense to shoot IDPA because there's more clubs, they're great clubs, all that stuff, that's great. But I'm telling you that just from a rules perspective, once you begin to understand the rules of both games, you begin to realize that a lot of the IDPA rules are somewhat arbitrary and like just intentionally different for stupid reasons from what the USPSA rules that they were based on were. And a lot of that is based around gear rules, and some of it's based around holster choices, whatever. But USPSA is about as pure of a action pistol sport as you can make. It pulls no punches. It's based on combat shooting way back in the day, but it acknowledges the fact that it's a game first, and I really enjoy and respect that about the game. But please do check out USPSA if you're at all curious about it. I think you'll be richly rewarded. If you don't own a reloading press, you probably need to start saving your pennies and go ahead and get that Dylan, because if you want to participate at the level everyone wants to participate in this game, you're going to need to stretch out your ammo money as much as you can. So get on the range, make some noise, and see you next time.